God knows right where you're at. You may feel invisible, but He knows right where you're at.
Joyce Meyer built a global empire from pain. Hundreds of books, a ministry worth hundreds of millions, a message built on surviving abuse and learning to forgive. But here's the part few people talk about. The woman who teaches forgiveness has children who rarely speak about her. The woman who preaches breaking generational curses has family members who quietly step back from the spotlight. How does someone who tells the world how to heal families struggle with silence inside her own? And what happened behind the scenes of one of America's most powerful ministries? Stay with me and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos like this, because this story is more complicated than it first appears. To understand how this tension began, you have to go back to 1943, long before the books, long before the broadcasts, long before Joyce Meyer became a household name. She was born Pauline Joyce Hutcherson in Fenton, Missouri. Her father returned from World War II changed. According to her own testimony, the abuse began when she was a child and continued for years. She has said her mother knew but felt powerless to stop it. That detail matters. The people closest to the pain did not intervene, and that silence shaped everything that followed. Joyce has spoken openly about the fear, the threats, and the shame. She built her ministry on telling that story. But trauma does not disappear overnight. It follows you into adulthood. It follows you into marriage. It follows you into motherhood. At 18, she married young, hoping to escape. The marriage lasted 5 years and produced one son, David. She later described that relationship as another cycle of dysfunction. So the question becomes, when someone grows up inside silence, what happens when they later build a life on speaking? In 1967, everything shifted. Joyce remarried, this time to Dave Meyer, an engineering draftsman who would later help build what became Joyce Meyer Ministries. This was not just a new relationship, it was a new direction. She began studying the Bible deeply. She started teaching small groups. She spoke about anger, control, and the emotional damage she carried from childhood. These are not outside claims. These are details she has admitted publicly. She has said she was hard to live with in those early years. She described herself as harsh, controlling, quick-tempered, and while she was working through that pain, she was also raising children. It's David from her first marriage, then 3 more, Laura, Sandra, and Daniel. 4 children in a home where healing was still in progress. Over time, her speaking invitations grew. Churches expanded into conferences. Conferences turned into television broadcasts. But here's the tension. While the public saw transformation, what did the children experience inside that home before the transformation was complete? These aren't accusations. They're questions that naturally rise when a private healing journey becomes a public platform. By the 1980s and 1990s, the growth was no longer small. What began as local teaching expanded into national television. Donations increased. Book sales multiplied. Conferences filled arenas. Joyce Meyer Ministries became one of the largest Christian ministries in the United States. At its peak, annual revenue reached well over $100 million. The documented facts show a ministry with global reach and massive infrastructure, offices, staff, international outreach. And inside that structure, her children were not distant observers. They worked within the organization, board positions, administrative roles, operational leadership. On the surface, it looked like a strong family business, but scale changes perception. As revenue grew, compensation reports later showed that family members and their spouses were earning substantial salaries from the nonprofit. The ministry defended those payments as appropriate for the work performed. No illegality was established, but the optics created tension. The woman who preached sacrifice now led a multi-million-dollar operation that directly supported her family. This raised questions, not legal ones, but moral and emotional ones. And when a ministry becomes an empire, what happens to the family inside it? In 2009, the spotlight grew sharper. Senator Chuck Grassley launched an inquiry into several high-profile televangelists, including Joyce Meyer. The focus was not criminal charges. It was financial transparency. How were donations being used? How were leaders compensated? At the time, reports had already highlighted the ministry's private jet and multiple homes. The documented facts showed significant assets connected to the organization. In response to scrutiny, the ministry made adjustments. It joined the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, agreeing to external financial standards and oversight. Executive compensation became more structured and more transparent. Again, no criminal findings were made, but the moment mattered, because public preaching about humility now existed alongside public reporting about wealth. The woman who taught viewers to trust God with their finances was now defending how ministry finances were managed. These aren't accusations, they are documented events, and when pressure rises from outside, families often feel it first on the inside. So how did that season of scrutiny shape the Meyer household behind closed doors? Despite the public scrutiny, one thing remained consistent. The children rarely spoke publicly about their experiences. David Meyer, the oldest from Joyce's first marriage, maintained a particularly low profile. Laura Holtzman and Sandra McCollum were visible at times, yet even their appearances were carefully measured. Daniel Meyer participated in ministry operations, but rarely offered personal reflections on growing up in such a high-profile environment. The documented facts show family involvement, but what they felt, what they witnessed, and how they processed the unique pressures of living in a globally recognized ministry remain largely absent from public records. The woman who shares every detail of her own childhood openly left her children's experiences mostly unspoken. This absence is itself revealing. Questions naturally arise. How does it feel to grow up in a home where trauma, redemption, and worldwide attention collide? How do children navigate fame when their mother's story is inseparable from her public ministry? These aren't accusations, they're observations, and the silence leaves a tension that the cameras and books cannot capture. Today, the Meyer children have gradually stepped back from the spotlight. David Meyer continues to maintain a low public profile, rarely appearing alongside his mother or speaking about the ministry. Laura, Sandra, and Daniel have shifted their focus toward private family life and personal endeavors, reducing their day-to-day involvement in Joyce Meyer Ministries. The documented facts show that while they were once integral to operations, their presence has slowly diminished, creating a quiet distance rather than a dramatic break. The woman whose life story revolves around breaking cycles of dysfunction now occupies the center of a family that keeps its perspectives mostly private. The contrast between public narrative and private experience is striking. What does it mean when the people who lived through the early, formative years of a ministry choose silence? How does a child process the story of abuse, forgiveness, and transformation when it's broadcast to millions around the world? These questions linger in the spaces between statements, interviews, and public appearances, leaving viewers to wonder about the realities that remain untold. Beyond finances and public appearances lies a deeper, more complex tension. Joyce Meyer has shared that she forgave her father for the abuse he inflicted during her childhood. She described praying with him in his final years and believing he repented. That public act of forgiveness is compelling, even inspiring. But what does it mean for her children? Did they meet their grandfather? How did they witness their mother's forgiveness? And how does that shape the next generation when the woman who teaches about breaking generational curses has her own family largely absent from public discussion? The documented facts show her teachings, her public forgiveness, and the ministry's ongoing influence, but they do not reveal the private emotional landscape of the family. The silence speaks volumes, suggesting that the story of healing, redemption, and restoration may be far more complicated behind closed doors than any sermon or book can capture. And yet the questions remain, unresolved, quietly hanging in the background. Joyce Meyer is now in her 80s, a global figure whose life story has inspired millions. Her ministry continues, her message of forgiveness and healing still resonates, and her personal narrative remains central to the organization she built. But the full story of her own family, the children who grew up inside that empire, who lived through the trauma, the transformation, and the scrutiny, remains largely untold. Maybe they are private. Maybe the silence is deliberate. Maybe growing up in a house where personal pain became public testimony leaves complexities that words cannot capture. And as the ministry looks to the future, questions linger. Will her children take a larger role, or will the empire continue without them? How does a family reconcile public legacy with private experience? The documented facts give a partial picture, but the quiet gaps leave the story open-ended. What really happened behind the doors of the Meyer household? That, perhaps, is the story we may never fully know. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos like this.